Everyone's expecting you. If you know them well, you know. Do as I say, not as I do. Welcome, friends, you know. Unity in all that we do. It isn't what you know. Just do as you're expected.
Operation Encore is a 501c nonprofit that is helping veterans turn into rock stars every single day. You can learn more about what Operation Encore is doing by going over to their website at www.operationencore.org. That is www.operationencore.org. If you can give them a hand, just click that little donate button or follow all of their social medias and learn exactly what they are doing to change the lives of our veterans every single day. Hey, welcome everybody to Spirits and Story. That's right. New name, amazing show. And man, it just worked out perfect because back when I was looking for guests, I came across this gentleman on app called Podmatch, and man, as soon as I read his bio, I knew we had to have a conversation. So that day has finally arose. So today we are going to bring on Dominic Guglielmi. He is widely considered one of the most prolific and knowledgeable collectors of Blanton's bourbon. He has amassed a nearly unrivaled collection of known Blanton's releases, including nearly all extremely rare and limited bottles. Let's bring on Dominic. How's it going, man?
Hey, Donald. Going great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, man. Oh, it's my honor, man. I read a little bit about you, and I was like, man, we have to have this conversation.
Well, I appreciate that. I've done one thing good in my life, apparently, and that's collect Blanton's bottles, bourbon.
Well, I mean, anybody that knows anything about bourbon, I mean, you don't have to be an expert to know that the collection you have is amazing. I mean, just trying to find a bottle is tough, you know?
Yeah.
Well, why don't you give everybody a little bit of a back history of how this came about?
Sure. Well, for me, it's it's like any other good story. It's a journey, and it all started about I want to say 2017. I wasn't a bourbon guy. I never grew up, in my adult years drinking bourbon. I, just beer, occasional cocktail, what have you. Just I knew what it was. I knew it was a whiskey or a type of whiskey, but I just I probably only ever had Maker's Mark and never really enjoyed it for the most part, from what I can recall. I never gave it a chance. Well, obviously, over the past 15 to 20 years, bourbon has exploded, and so as friends and family, just anybody has started getting into it, I took notice, and I think it was my old boss. So I know it was my old boss who asked me, if I'd ever tried Blanton's, and it was a brand I'd never even heard of, and so I tried it, and it was good, like as good as any others I'd tried or sipped on at that point. But more importantly, she gave me a bottle of Blanton's, and so I was kind of enamored. It was something that everybody sort of gravitates towards. The listeners that don't know, it's got a horse on top, and they're collectible, and the bottle kind of looks like a grenade, and it was just something that what draws most people to the brand is the look of the packaging. So that really kind of I fell in love with it like anybody else for that kind of vain reason, and then after that, I finished the bottle and I wanted more. I'll get another one. I think I probably wanted to start collecting the letters. Each horse stopper has an individual letter, and they spell out Blanton's if you collect them all. And so I went to look for one, and this is 2017, so it was probably before bourbon hit its real highs in the COVID time. But it was something when I couldn't find it, and I looked everywhere on the internet, and I started finding it, double, triple what standard retail pricing would be, and that kind of shocked me. And And then I discovered other varieties of it. And there's 7 currently produced varieties of Blanton's. Up until recently, all of them, other than the original Blanton's, are distributed internationally. More recently, they've started carrying a few of those here in the United States. So I had this quest to obtain them all, and like a Pokemon journey. And so with that, I basically started finding those, and two or three of them were Japanese exclusives, and I was doing a lot of travel at the time to Japan for business. And so that seemed like a perfect fit. I could hunt Blanton's while I was there, and I did do that quite a bit. But soon I had all 7. Soon it was like, oh, I've got the lineup. I've got them all. Yep. But one thing bothered me, and that was during my quest and my searches for Blanton's, or just seeing other people's social media posts, I'd see these bottles that were strikingly different than the normal Blanton's bottles I was used to running across, and they were fancy labels and things like that. And I quickly realized they were part of festival bottles or limited releases done for festivals, things like that. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to start learning about those. And so that led me to cataloging the brand. And so my first kind of forte into collecting beyond that initial lineup, the 7 produced varieties, commonly produced varieties today, was really kind of just let's catalog the brand. I'm not going to be able to buy these. They had crazy price tags on them. Yeah. So that was where I started. And I launched a website, and really that's how my journey began.
I can vouch completely, because the only Blanton's I've ever found are usually behind a case sealed with an iron guard. They kind of look at you like you ask, can I see that bottle? And they kind of look at you like, no, you can't afford it.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's really two experiences people have. If you live in a liquor control state, such as I'm in Ohio, the state regulates the pricing. So Blanton's is going to be available for $65 on the shelf. If it stays there more than 10 minutes, that would be shocking, And so it flies off the shelf. You can't find it here ever unless you get really lucky. At a state that doesn't control pricing, you get into your Washington or New York state, for example, you'll find it on the shelves at $200, $300, So it's they price it, and they're just waiting for the person to come along who's, from a state like mine, who can't believe they're seeing it, and they'll pay crazy price for it. And that's a whole topic in itself that I write about a lot in a book that I just released about the brand. And that's the polarization, the hype, the hypocrisy. It's a brand that it sparks emotion in the bourbon community. And that emotion ranges from complete adoration to absolute spite and misery and hate, and it's a very interesting brand. So,
well, I'm going to tell you, everything in life has to have balance. So, nobody would care if everybody loved it; it would kind of lose its luster. But if you got equal balance between haters and lovers, everything's in perfect harmony.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true, and it's I mentioned my journey, so the other end of the journey where I'm at now, after I've collected all of these rare bottles and expressions, I ran out of sort of but the fun was the collecting, right? It was the ability to sort of obtain and then covet and have it. Once that ran out and there was nothing else to sort of find, I decided to write a book. And as I mentioned, that's what I've recently published. And in that book, and to your point a moment ago, I really tried to take a fair look at the brand. I admit I am extremely biased when it comes to this brand.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do recognize all the counterpoints and the people that have, challenges with sort of how Blanton's is interpreted within the bourbon community and so forth. And so the book is more historical than fanboy. I can absolutely say that. It is written from the standpoint of, let's look at what this bourbon has done for the bourbon community versus, oh, it's great, it's the best bourbon ever. It's not. I mean, you're not going to find that written in the book. In fact, excuse me, I write just the opposite. I write that it absolutely isn't the best bourbon that money can buy, because it's not. Now, at one time, it probably was. when it was first introduced, but we've come a long way in the bourbon world, and now it's a decent middle tier bourbon. And so I get into that. I get into that whole sort of polarization of the brand and its impact on American history. And in fact, that's the bourbon history. That's the I guess the secondary subject of the book is really the impact it has had on the industry.
Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about a new company. They've been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And the one part I've never really really figured out completely is, where does the tie with Blanton's and Buffalo Trace? How do they tie together?
Yeah, it's a great topic, and it's a bit nuanced. There's some levels to that. So probably the best way to describe it from today's perspective, as far as what's happening, Buffalo Trace is producing Blanton's, but they don't own the brand. So it's almost it is a contract-based relationship. And so the brand owners for Blanton's is a company called Age International. Age International is a small company based here in the U.S., but they're owned in whole by a Japanese company.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, a Japanese company called Takara Shuzo owns Age International. And so Takara, very big spirits importer, exporter, distributor, producer in Japan. They bought Age International back in 1992, if my memory serves me correct, when it was originally sold to them, is back in 92. So yeah, they currently have that same relationship they maintain all these years. So Buffalo Trace gets all the credit. Everybody says Blanton's, Buffalo Trace, Blanton's, Buffalo Trace, make more of it. Buffalo Trace actually controls very, very little with the brand. They get all the fanfare, but they are really just producing it on behalf of another company, is kind of how it boils down.
Kind of like a licensing agreement.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's and that other company, Age International, they like the relationship. They like not being out there in front of it. They allow Buffalo Trace to, get all the laurels and the praise and and I guess hate too, but very much behind the scenes. And that's not the only brand that is produced in this relationship. There's also Elmer T. Lee Bourbon, Rock Hill Farms, President's Reserve, and what's the other one? There's one. Ancient Age is another one. So those are all part of Mash Bill number 2, which is the recipe that Buffalo Trace is using to produce all of those bourbons. It's the ingredients, and those are all owned by Age International.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. That part I did not know. That is interesting, because it would make sense that, you just increase the amount a tad bit and you still control the price somewhat, and, the bottom dollar. But I think that would kill the brand. I really do. Just because part of Blanton's is the hunt. I mean, that is, when you hear people talking about it, you don't really hear the conversations about the taste or anything like that. It is the thrill of looking for it, like you were saying before, and saying, "Hey, I finally found it." That's part of being a hunter.
It is, and you've touched on what ultimately is one of the biggest complaints in any even if you go and look at Buffalo Trace social media posts, the official Blanton's bourbon Instagram, which is run by Age International, not Buffalo Trace, but any of those social media posts, anytime they post a tchotchke that they're selling in the gift shop, or a picture of the bottle in a seasonal, like in a Christmas sweater or something gimmicky, the replies are always just loaded up with, "Wish you made more of it. Wish I could get it. Wish I could find it." And it's interesting, because it's one thing to, I guess, have a challenge, have a gripe when you can't find it. I certainly understand that and appreciate it, but the lengths that people go to theorize about why that is really funny. And in my own research for the book, and just knowledge of the brand as I grew to enjoy it and collect it, I realized so many of those are falsehoods. People think that it is being limited in production in order to drive the hype and hysteria. And that's just so far from the truth. With
Yeah.
bourbon, it's an aged spirit. It ages in the barrel, and it takes 6 to 8 years to produce the Blanton's products. And so first and foremost, you're only as good as your forecasts were 6 to 8 years ago when you put the bourbon in the barrel to begin that journey.
Yep.
And so that's the the first thing is it's always looking forward to the future and looking back from where you are today. And so they have done a ton at Buffalo Trace to increase productivity. They've added a third shift to the bottling hall that they use, the room that they use to bottle Blanton's. So they're bottling 24, not 7, but 5 days a week. And they're producing significantly more than they were even 15, 20 years ago. There's just so much demand, it doesn't matter. I mean, the product flies off the shelf. And
Yep.
You never see an advertisement for a Blanton's or many other
Yep.
popular brands of bourbon, because why would you spend a dime in advertising when your product is literally flies off the shelf? And that's a great problem to have, I guess.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And I find it fascinating because you kind of touched on it a little bit ago about not necessarily, when I first started getting into bourbon, and I'm by far no expert. I drink it because I enjoy it. But I thought the more the bourbon cost, the better it was, and I think that's like the rookie belief,
Yeah.
And then I slowly learned that the price doesn't really matter. And the more bland the bottle is, the better chances of how good the whiskey is, because at the end of the day, they didn't spend a whole lot of money on a fancy glass to attract you. And that's just kind of what I know. I mean, my favorite bourbon that I buy is called Walker's K, and very cheap bottle. It's hard for me to find. They're just in certain areas, but I can order it online.
Yep.
I get 2 bottles for the price of 3 because shipping costs about the same as 1 bottle. So
yeah, right.
But it's really good. It's about $35 a bottle, and I enjoy it. But
people ask me what I like. Woodford Reserve is my kind of go-to, and a lot of my bourbon friends and other authors and that are more experienced than I am, certainly even in bourbon, laugh at me at that. But no, I fully agree. It's and drink what you like and what appeals to your taste.
Yep, absolutely. Because I mean, that's what it's about. It's about a happy, storytelling, conversational drink. 1 or 2 drinks and the stories are over, the conversation's over, and everybody goes about their way. But for the most part, that's just what it is. It's about sharing stories and drinks. It's not uncommon for people to really not open up a bottle unless they've got somebody else there to drink with.
That's right.
I spend a lot of time alone, so I don't wait. But
yeah, right. Listen, I understand that notion. It's interesting as you said that, it made me think. For your listeners, if especially if they're not maybe big bourbon folks listening, definitely check out the I think it's on Netflix. It's called Neat, Neat. Just a wonderful story of bourbon and it's not soup to nuts, but it's very much, it covers sort of the warmth of what you were just talking about there. It's a beverage that should be shared with friends and enjoyed and sipped, and the nuances of it. I can't recommend that enough. And they highlight some Buffalo Trace products certainly, and some characters that work at Buffalo Trace that are awesome people. Make some appearances in the video, in the documentary. So highly recommended.
It's kind of funny because the other thing too I've noticed is regionally, wherever you go, different things are hard to find, right?
Yeah.
And prime example, the same liquor store I've been shopping at for years in Georgia. I live in Missouri right now, where I take care of my mom, but my wife and kids and everybody's still in Georgia, so I go back and forth. And there's this one little package store that I always go, and he's usually got a pretty good selection of bourbon, and he's a Scotch drinker himself.
Okay.
But one day he had a bottle of Eagles Rare. I've been hearing about how great Eagles Rare is, right? And I said, oh, you got Eagles Rare? He said, first time in 2 years. He said, I used to get 1 case a year, and that's all they would give me. He said, last year they gave me none, and this year they gave me 1. So I've gotten one case. So I said, well, how much is a bottle? He said, $65. I said, yeah, you can get that for about 40 anywhere else.
Yeah, right. It is. It's all depending on where you're at and where they're, and that's like, I'm in Ohio. I mentioned we have Weller. Ohio is known as a Weller state, and so people, and I don't really need any more Weller. I've had enough of it. It doesn't, but Eagle Rare, same thing. I don't see it, and when I go to like New York, I see it, and actually decent prices too for the most part. So it is so interesting how the distribution process works, and the allocations and the laws, and how the states drop the bottles in the stores when they control it. It is a mess, which is interesting, because one of the themes of my book, or chapters I should say, really discusses kind of the whole process of how people purchase Blanton's and find it, and is it worth the extra money. And so I kind of dive deep into the equation of time versus money. And so for me, I'm more of an instant gratification person, right? I want something, I get it. And, it's like so many of us now in these days, we're, the Amazon generation. And so for me, as I collected, but even for the more common bottles of Blanton's, I never went and waited in lines and drove all over town, because for me, the extra few dollars I was going to spend were worth it to save all that time and effort. Now, some people enjoy that hunt. Some people kind of enjoy maybe going store to store and making friends with the person that runs the store and hoping that they hold back a bottle, and that's okay, to each his own. But for me, it was all about, if I wanted it, I'll find it online, and I'll pay extra, but it was worth it. But that said, I also discuss and kind of make it a point in the book to say you shouldn't consistently be overpaying for Blanton's. If you've never had a bottle and you just really want one, okay, fine. You could spend a couple $100 if you had to.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't be buying multiple bottles at that price for consumption, because again, to your point earlier, it's just not worth, the bourbon, the price of it doesn't mean it's better. And that's very true.
Yeah. And a lot of people, I've seen people that have two different types too. They have a shelf that they'll probably never open up until the day they die, and it's just their collection shelf. And then they've got their other stuff. I have a little bit different. I have the stuff I drink, and then I have this one little bottle of Southern Comfort over here. That's my guest liquor. So if people come and visit me, you're getting the cheap stuff.
You're getting the Southern Comfort. Hey, listen, that's all right.
Yep. And that's a whole other fight on whether that's even a bourbon. But some people say no. I know it's cheap. And you're not going to drink all $70 stuff. So.
It reminds me of the Jack Daniels conversations and the arguments there people have about that. So that's the beauty for me. I'm a one trick pony. I'll drink anything, and I wrote this in the book. I'll drink anything, but a lot of times, and I can probably say this for your audience because it's not the core bourbon audience that I run into on similar interviews and podcasts, but I'm not really a bourbon guy. I love it. Any alcohol is good to me. I do think whiskey's better than vodka. I'm not totally a kid anymore, but I got into Blanton's on the collecting side of it. I acquired the bottles I acquired for the collectability of it, and people can argue that that's dumb or whatever, but for me, that's what got me into it. And I don't own a lot of whiskey. A lot of people, if you look at their basement bars or man caves or what have you, they're going to have a whole variety of stuff. You don't see that with me. You see a lot of Blanton's and a lot of very rare Blanton's, some that only maybe a few bottles are even known to exist in the world. That's all cool, but you don't see variety. And it's because at the end of the day, I'm going to buy a Woodford. I'm going to drink it.
Yep.
I don't have any, and part of it is I don't want to get into another brand because it'll be the same thing, right? E.H. Taylor, for example, another Buffalo Trace product, has a whole lineup. Very expensive, some of them. And, if I get one or two, I got to have them all. So I just avoid the whole thing. I went all in on Blanton's, and, here I am.
Yeah. And I mean, you went all in on probably one of the hardest to find. What is that one bottle that you were just struggling to find that you finally located?
That's a good question. So there's well, first to answer that in a long-winded way, the brand itself is challenging to, if you kind of say like, how do I collect them all, or what is a full collection? A lot of these other brands, if you look at, Pappy Van Winkle or I mentioned E.H. Taylor a minute ago, there's relatively small set of bottles that are produced and or varieties that are produced. Certainly there are nuances over the years. There's very special one-offs, especially in the Pappy world. But Blanton's over the years has really catered itself to these, as I mentioned earlier, festivals and special bottlings and events and private label. So there's just a lot more of them than what I've seen with other brands. So yes, I did pick a tough one, and obviously it's super popular, which made it even harder. But to answer your question, there's probably 2 or 3 what I call the real unicorns of Blanton's. And the unicorn term is one that in the bourbon world people refer to in different ways or use that term in different ways. One is if they find a bottle they've coveted forever, might not necessarily be rare, but maybe it is in their state or what have you. It's a unicorn to them, right? That's fine. Others may value the term a little bit more as this is a bottle that's very rare. A Pappy maybe would fall into that. But then the bottles that I looked for that I struggled with, frankly, almost half of them probably qualified as unicorns. Things that were bottled in 200 to 600 bottles and sent to Europe 10, 15, 20 years ago. How many of those exist still that weren't drank at the time? Yeah. And of course they're all in Europe, so they have to make their way back here. But then even within that, there was exceptionally rare bottles. And so the Sterling Silver Edition is probably my number one answer as far as what bottle I most covet or was the hardest to find. But what was interesting was when I found one, there's only 15 known to exist with collectors. 100% sterling silver. You can see pictures on my website, warehouseh.com. But it's a beautiful bottle. And once I found one, all of a sudden I found more. I've actually found 3 total in my collecting journey, and I still own 2 of them. Buffalo Trace has one in their whiskey vault. Age International has one in their office. So that's the one that most Blanton's people would say is the hardest or the most coveted. What's interesting though is it didn't end up being the hardest for me to find at the end of my journey. One of the ones that probably I'm most proud of is one that's called the My Only Blanton's release, and it's a very special label. It's got a metal label on it that surrounds the bottle instead of the paper label. And what makes it special is limited number, all sent to Japan. It was a private barrel pick program where rich, wealthy Japanese people and bought a whole barrel and had it bottled for them. I own one of only 2, now only one of 1 known bottles that it was bottled at 141.9 proof. So that is the highest proof that was ever bottled for Blanton's. Yeah. And there was 2 bottles that one of them was opened at a bar in Kentucky and consumed. But this is the other one. And there's really, I think, only 2 other people that have this same label. It's a beautiful label, and it just, it's a special bottle. So that probably was one of my hardest ones to find and track down. And when you think about it, you think, gosh, only 2 or 3 others out there that are known to exist still. It just makes it pretty special. So
yeah, no, I completely get that, because again, part of it is I kind of relate it to the kid at the toy store. They've got this image of what they want, and when they go in the toy store, they're hunting it. Well, I kind of feel that same way when I go into a liquor store that I've not been into.
Yes.
My mind always wonders what is out there that I don't have, and it just makes it fun, and then, I recently got into another side of this. I bought one of those little decorative charcoal oak barrels. I had at the time it was 2 Drunk Dudes. Yeah. I had that label put on the front of it. And I've got a buddy of mine who makes some really good moonshine. And for whatever reason, he cannot sell the middle part of that run. Everybody wants that 140, 150 proof gasoline that they're drinking. And so he sells me the 90 to 95 proof for $60 a gallon. And so I turn it into bourbon. I put it in the little barrels, and I try different things. And whenever I go to
experiment.
Yep. And whenever I go to these military events, these little festivals and stuff, I hand them out to other soldiers that I've talked to online that I know, and I give them a little
Nice.
pint bottle of what I make. I don't sell it, it's
Yeah.
I share it, and it's just a lot of
Great.
fun because I enjoyed that part of it, and then we get to share it with another group of people that have similar stories. So I think it's a great hobby. It's a great way to have conversations. I usually drink some with it just about every show. A lot of times I will, a lot of people don't know this, but the secret will get out now that we're not two drunk dudes anymore. But what I used to do is I used to always mix my bourbon with Pepsi. And
Okay.
long shows that were going to be long. The reason why I would do that is I would then fill my glass up the rest of the way with Pepsi.
Right.
It would be no more. Yep.
Keeps
and that way,
into the bourbon. Yeah.
And people don't realize it. And I'm not getting drunk. And, I never wanted that to be part of the show. But for a lot of people, just because of the name, they assume that I drank all the time. So I just kind of kept up with the image by hiding it with Pepsi.
Yeah,
but
nothing wrong with that. That's
But
listen, it's anybody can, what I've learned in this, of course, the real bourbon aficionados, there's folks out there right now that are just, chuckling, right?
Yep.
I get it, right? If you want to understand the nuances of the flavor of bourbon, you got to drink it neat, drop of water, that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, it really does go back to, especially when you're in private, nobody's judging you, drink it how you want it, because even Elmer T. Lee, who is the famous master distiller at Buffalo Trace, has the bourbon named after him, was part of the launch of Blanton's. Even he preferred to drink his bourbon with 7-Up or Sprite.
Yeah.
Now, he wouldn't do that if he was doing a tasting profile to really understand those nuances. But as far as just his daily consumption, go for it, right? And listen, if you're doing that, my only request is just all the more reason not to buy the expensive stuff, right? Buy your $20, $30 bottle and mix it with whatever you want and have fun, but because it does mask, of course, those nuances.
Oh yeah.
No shame though. Heck, why not?
Yeah. And like I said, I did it more just to disguise how much I was drinking. But,
sure.
For the most part, this is pretty much how I drink it. This is actually the closest I could get to Blanton's was Buffalo Trace, so that's what I went with tonight.
Nice. Yeah. No. Hey, listen, it's all made right there. I've got I'm sipping on a Japanese Black Label. It's 80 proof. So this is the same for the folks who can see this online. That I've got holding it up, but it's a Black Label. It's only 80 proof, but for me it's easy to drink, and like you said, you don't kind of get ahead of yourself too much by dry. I've got 135 proof straight from the barrel that I haven't opened, but that's one to end the night on, not start the night.
Yeah. My buddy, he tried to make some bourbon one time, and he did it the real trailer park way, I guess. He did it with the Jack Daniel barbecue wood chips.
Oh man.
Yeah. And he wanted to make it a maple bourbon, right? And he knew that's pretty much all I drank was bourbon. So he wanted me to try it to see. And I took just a little bit out of that mason jar he gave me, and I gave him the whole mason jar back. And he said, "You didn't like it?" And I said, "Well, I only use 87 octane for my car. I don't know what you want me to do." It was like 130 proof, and I'm like, that's Everclear, man, with maple sauce.
I don't mind the high proof, but that sounds like an interesting, interesting recipe there. So I'd leave it to the experts. I haven't done too much experimenting in that regard. Probably the closest I get is, a lot of people do their infinity bottles where they'll take little bits of others and mix them together and stuff. With me, Blanton's is all the same mash bill, right? So it is as far as mixing Blanton's with Blanton's, when I get low on a few of the bottles and mix them together, that's not really risky because it's essentially the same product.
Right.
But it's, at the same time, it's, whatever.
Well, let's get into another little side of this then. So while we're talking about how it's made, most of Blanton's is single barrel, right? They don't do any. Yeah.
Correct.
So tell the listeners, explain the difference of why is single barrel so more important than double barrel, and then you've got what do they call
small batch?
Small batch.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
What does all this mean?
Well, so that is a fantastic question as well, and it really starts. That's why Blanton's has historic. And so the book itself, it says, I have on the front of it, I have the story of Blanton's, America's most influential whiskey. And the reason why I call it the most influential whiskey in America is because it was the first commercially available single barrel bourbon. So what is single barrel bourbon? It's just that. It's bourbon that comes from one barrel and is bottled from that one barrel. Now they may dilute it or water it down to a different proof point from what came out of the barrel. But all those bottles are bottled from one barrel. They're not mixed together. And so prior to Blanton's, and still very common today with many products, especially your mid to lower tier products, they do blend the barrels together. They call it mingling, barrel mingling. So they dump them all in these barrels into big vats and tanks and things and mix them all together. One of the benefits of doing that is it hides the barrels that have aged differently or poorly. It masks those poor barrels because it's all diluted within the better barrels. It creates a more uniform product. They can, you kind of, the way I write about it in the book is I call it sort of that McDonald's experience. You go to McDonald's down the road from you or down the road from me, it's going to taste the same. That's what they get when they do the barrel mingling. And so, it's easy, obviously it's easy to do as well. So what happened was first off, a little bit more in history. If you go back to the 1800s, all bourbon, all whiskey was effectively single barrel, because back then they would distill it and they weren't bottling it, especially prior to the, I want to say 1880s. I'm probably wrong on that, so don't correct me, everyone. But we'll say late 1800s sometime. They weren't bottling it directly for consumption at the distillers, and so they would ship it off in barrels to the taverns and bars and distributors and things like that. And at those places, a lot of times you might go and take your growler or whatever they called them and filled it up and took your whiskey home. So it was all single barrel back then. And then what happened was the Bottle and Bond Act, which again was the late 1800s. And one of the reasons why that act came to be was it allowed uniformity. It created uniformity. There was a lot of nefarious people in the whiskey world back then, and they would create products that were counterfeit or substandard or maybe adulterated with other products. And so they created this bottle. The government had the Bottle and Bond Act, and it allowed for this whiskey to be more regulated and more standardized. And so with it, the idea of mingling barrels together became preferred. It was legal, and it created consistency, and that consistency resonated with consumers as quality versus a product that varied drastically. The piece I probably failed to mention is every barrel ages differently, and so that's why, again, you have different characteristics on how the barrels age and the flavors from within. So you fast forward and you say, okay, barrel mingling became popular, and that's kind of the standard. Blanton's came along and reintroduced the original concept of, bringing a single barrel to market. And what they did was, not every single barrel, again, is great. They handpicked it. It was picking the best barrels and saying, these are Blanton's, and we can charge a premium for them. And they were good.
I believe in your book, you also mentioned something about that, about how when they came to market with this philosophy, somebody referred to it as similar to throwing the Hail Mary, trying to save the whiskey industry. And I personally, because I only have such a little small barrel, but if you go back in that time frame, I mean, we're talking about where it aged at was more in an open pole barn type sediment. So the harsh of a winter and the hot of the summer, from season to season, as it varies, can also change the flavor of the whiskey or the bourbon, because of the barrel swelling more or less and so forth. Am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely. The warehouses all have different characteristics, and so the different distillers, even the warehouse workers, the foremen, etc., they would all have their own preferences. Elmer T. Lee, who I mentioned earlier, was the master distiller at Buffalo Trace for so long. He had his preferences, and it was all because of the characteristics of those warehouses. For example, brick versus a metal warehouse. Warehouse H is where Blanton's is mostly aged. I get into that topic in my book, but everybody thinks all Blanton's is aged there for its entire life. That's not quite accurate. But Warehouse H is a metal clad warehouse. And so to your point, absolutely. The elements, it is heated, steam heated, but the elements, the cold winters really permeate and get into that warehouse more easily. And therefore that bourbon goes in and out of the wood and interacts with it differently than maybe a warehouse that's, stone or brick. So that does play a big part of it.
Yeah. And I think that's one part that I always find interesting about bourbon compared to whiskey is that aging process. Bourbon can't be aged for 1 or 2 years and then be called bourbon. There's a time frame that they recommend for it to be actually aged to, if I'm not mistaken. And whiskey, is 6 months to a year.
Yeah, well, all bourbon is whiskey. So bourbon itself is whiskey, and you're right, there are strict rules around bourbon and what it can be distinguished as. What's interesting, and that's all regulated, U.S. Federal Code regulated. What's interesting about bourbon is it actually is bourbon the moment it goes in the barrel. So when they get done with the distilling process, the final result, the distillate that comes out after the, of course, the fermentation and the distillation, they call it white dog, and it looks like vodka, and it. Tell you the truth, I don't think it tastes as good as vodka. And it's you can buy it. Buffalo Trace, I think, and several others release a white dog product, and anybody that tells you it's good is lying because it's not. A majority of bourbon's flavor comes from the wood, and you think about the barrels. They caramelize the barrels by putting a flame to them essentially, and it roasts it chars the inside of the barrel, and that process takes the sugars and caramelizes them and so forth. And as the bourbon when they put the bourbon in the barrel, it interacts with that. That's what gives it its color and a lot of its flavor. And so, but yeah, what is interesting is technically and legally, the moment bourbon hits the inside of a charred oaked barrel, it's bourbon. So you could dump that out 2 seconds later and call it bourbon, but it wouldn't be very good. But yeah, there are quite a few, nuanced rules as to what makes it. Aging plays a part in how they label bourbon. There are different categories of bourbon, straight bourbon, and there are rules around the age statement on a bottle and things like that. There's some nuances that I talk about that briefly in my book because it applies to Blanton's in a way, but for the most part, it's all good in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. And there is other stuff I drink too. I like Crown Royal. I like. I got a little bit of Gentleman Jack up there. I do like it.
Yeah.
So I'm not just bourbon. I'm probably like 90% bourbon. But, there's days I'll also, like you said earlier in the show, I like some cocktails. I'll make some white.
Oh, yeah.
Stuff like that.
For sure.
Just on special days or whatever. I just want something different. I think that's the military side of me because, when my first duty station, I was in Korea. And the guy that was in the room next to me had gone to school to be a bartender. So when you walk in his room, his wall was covered in all sorts of different
drinks for everybody.
Yeah. And he got in some trouble, and that's exactly what he said. He said, look, I like different stuff. He said, I don't drink it all. But I have to have it. So if I can make this or make that. And,
yeah, sure.
And so that's where I kind of got introduced to the liquor side. Up to that point, I was strictly beer. And, then bourbon came years later down the road. But it is really interesting when you have conversations with bourbon people, because some of them are very snobbish and they think it should be done and drank a certain way and how it's made, But I think that's part of the fun in it too. Is
it is. Thoughts, And that's I put a line in the book with Blanton specifically about love it or hate it, but respect it. And, kind of getting back to what we were saying a minute ago as well, the single barrel bourbon concept that Blanton's introduction sort of relaunched, it created a premium tier of bourbon. And so if you go back it was launched in 1984. If you go back into the 70s and 80s and even most of the 90s, bourbon was dead in the U.S.
Yeah.
The quick story is that up through the 1960s, it was the number one distilled spirit in America. But the baby boomers, as they came of age, they rejected it. They rejected it wholeheartedly. They didn't want what their parents and grandparents drank. And so they embraced wine, vodka, gin, things like that.
Mhm.
And so bourbon just went on a steep decline that lasted all through the 70s, 80s, and like I said, into the 90s. And so that is where you see things like the Japanese investments into companies like Age International and Blanton's. And you also see this idea of Blanton's coming to the market in '84. Nobody really wanted bourbon. And here they were introducing a premium bourbon, which sold at the time for about $25.
Yeah.
When other bourbons were certainly less than $10, $6, $7, $8 range.
Mhm.
So it was geared towards a premium, an audience that really wanted to go in and want to buy something top shelf. That seed they planted when they introduced it led to other single barrel products that Buffalo Trace later introduced, and then also other competing distilleries introducing what you mentioned earlier, which was small batch, which small batch is really just a more controlled barrel mingling. There's no rules around it. You might take 5 barrels, you might take 100, but it's going to be a more controlled process, more of a premium product like a single barrel, but a little more regulation than just dumping a whole bunch, a whole bunch of barrels together. So small batches started coming out, and by the mid 90s, the people were starting to take note. It was starting to become something where people, in the elite circles in New York and Hollywood started to kind of see bourbon at this higher level. It took another 10 years, but starting in the mid 2000s, it really started to get a little more attention. Hollywood started bottle placements in various movies, things like that, and then it just boomed, right? So I'm telling you the Super Reader's Digest version, but what my book tries to encapsulate is that history in saying that, look, forget about what you think about Blanton's today, and maybe you love it, maybe you hate it, maybe you have no opinion, but respect the history where it was sort of the catalyst that led a lot of other things to happen, which eventually collectively helped bring bourbon back to where it is today. So I'm not giving it all the credit. I don't think it's one single thing that happened, but I do think it was revolutionary in that regard and historical.
Yeah, I mean, look, in business, at the end of the day, if you don't change and adapt, you will die. And there's been so many businesses out there that have proved that theory. So you have to give them credit, just like you're saying, because they were the only ones that were making a product just like this and changing the way it's perceived and bought. So you have to give it credit. The other thing I kind of want to dive into is your book, because I am currently writing 2 books. One is a fiction, one is kind of the history of my PTSD and how things went. It's more of something I wrote for my kids, and they decided they wanted me to publish it, but it was giving them answers to what had gone through. The thing even though that was so personal to me, I still found how challenging it is to write a book.
Yeah.
So even with all the knowledge that you have, how hard was it still to get through the book?
Oh, you summed it up right there. Let me answer it by saying this. I've thought about writing another book, but because there's no subject that I can think of that I'm as knowledgeable about as I was with this, I can't figure out where to get started because it would be even that much harder. And so to answer your question it was extremely difficult. I think that what I did was I'm a little focused. I do a good job of focusing on the end goal and recognizing that I just don't want to fail. And so early on, when I said I was going to do it, and then I told a few people I was going to do it, I realized that I'd locked myself in because I wasn't going to be the guy that said, I'm writing a book. And then I didn't do it. And so I kind of just had to do it. And so, I committed myself, and it went through its ups and downs, I'm sure. And you've gone through it. And, there was days I can tell you there was days that I couldn't get a word out, and I'm just sitting there struggling. And then there was days where I was Shakespeare, just flowing, just flowed from my mind. And there was times where I'd go through, I was really big into sort of iteration and going back and redoing things and rewriting things, and not just always feeling like I got to keep going, but continual improvement of what I've already done.
Yep.
And in that, I had same thing. I had frustration, but I also had days where that were just, I'd rewrite something and it was just the perfect pair, and I would jump up literally and just be like, yes, that's awesome, and
Yep.
so it was, just a lot of that, just iterative,
Yep.
keep, I mentioned to you before we started up the podcast that I left my corporate job about a year ago, and I had a few months before I started a new gig that I had the luxury of just being able to sit and write. And it was during the winter months, and I was able to just kind of hash it out, and hours and hours and hours a day. But it was exciting, and it was fun. And you know what? I'll say this. I didn't realize, obviously I didn't realize how much work it was going to be, but I didn't realize how much work it was going to be after I got the manuscript done. I was only 50% done with the journey. The whole publishing and getting it printed and getting it, that was in itself, the layout and design. I mean, every bit as challenging as just getting the words onto paper for the first time. So it was a journey of learning, and that's probably why I haven't started to write another one, because I'm just like, oh, I know what's ahead of me if I start this.
Yeah, it is. I'm telling you, it is challenging. And that fiction book that I'm writing, there's just days where I'll go to start writing, and I can put myself in these characters, and things just start flowing. And then there's other days where I'm just like, I don't know who the hell you are, and why am I doing this?
Yeah.
I just have to put it down and find another day that I'm in that moment.
That's amazing. You're doing both, though. I mean, I of course, nonfiction was my journey, but and so it was a lot of research and just being able to organize ideas and concepts on what chapter flow would look like and things. But I can only imagine the fiction writing journey. That's hats off to you, because that takes creativity beyond, I think, just being able to articulate facts in a narrative that makes sense to people.
Well, for me, I think, it wasn't, because I kept it military related. The theme is it's about some 5 people that have a separate mission. They're out of the military, and they're helping out with a nonprofit company that tries to bring people back that are being human trafficked. All right. At the same time, each one of the individuals on that team have another agenda, another mission to deal with their life, of why they're there and everything else. One of them, he's seen something in the military, and they kind of put him out, said that he was mentally unstable, and they kicked him out of the CIA. And so he's trying to investigate why all of that happened, at the same time using the nonprofit to go to places to help out with human trafficking and do his investigation. So it's things, because I worked with a lot of special ops kind of guys. So I'm familiar with that. So some of it's fiction, some of it's things that I've seen. And
but that's good if you can weave in. I mean, you can weave in those journeys and those experiences you've had. It helps the pages flow. It helps the characters develop, I'm sure. And that's that's fascinating. That's it's neat. It's I don't, you didn't ask for my advice, but the only advice I would give to anyone, no matter where they're at, beginning, middle, or even end of their writing journey, is just write. Just do it for yourself. Don't do it for anyone else. Don't think about, I never wrote the book thinking how many I would sell or how successful it would be. For me, it was the happiest day was the day that I held it in my hands for the first time. That was all that it mattered. And I knew, probably, especially with the level of photography and things that I had to put into my journey, and legal opinions and things like that, I knew it was probably not even going to make money, which is a really dedicated journey if you're going into writing. And it's been better received than I had projected, so I'm glad I kind of lowballed my estimates. But again, it wasn't done for any, it wasn't done for money. It wasn't it's a journey, and that's what's fun. And the feeling you have, it's the accomplishment that you have. Probably unlike most other accomplishments I've had in my life. I mean, it was just very self-satisfying. And I joke, people come over and I have copies of the book like in every room of the house, and I mean, and they're like, why do you have so many of your book? And I'm like, well, listen, you write a book, you're going to put it everywhere too. Like, it gives you a chance to,
It is a true accomplishment. I cannot wait till I get to that point where I can hold
you'll get there.
you know,
Get there,
because
and if there's anything I can do to help you, what I will tell you is don't be afraid to use your network, of people. I reached out. The forward for my book is written by somebody named David Jennings, and he wrote. I tell people in short, and I hope he doesn't get offended by this. I tell people he's the me of wild turkey, or I'm the him of Blanton's.
yeah.
He essentially is a wild turkey geek, and he is even into their brand, I think, more than I am into Blanton's. He
Wow.
has a very active blog, very active social media, very nuanced. I kind of just collected the bottles, wrote a book. He's into wild turkey. But Dave's a great guy. And he is, in fact, I get to see him next week, which is exciting. First time I've ever going to meet him in person.
Oh, wow.
But he wrote the foreword, and I reached out to him because he was I reached out to maybe 4 or 5 notable whiskey authors, and he was the only one that responded. I was kind of a nobody, right? And I was, hey, I want to write a Blanton's book. I'm a big Blanton's collector. And he responded. And the guy was a salt of the earth Southern gentleman. He lives in South Carolina, just a wonderful person. And he took the time to spend with me during those initial kind of few months when I was getting started. And, he said, look, tell me what you need or how many questions you have. And that really helped me. And so yeah, let me know if you ever need anything, because it is a journey. And I think it takes a network of people to tell you to keep you going, but
Yep.
do it, because the end is so satisfying.
That is actually the final project of our nonprofit that I have. So the nonprofit that I started helps veterans use media as therapy. So we have a radio station that plays nothing but music from veterans that are trying to become musicians.
Oh,
we
cool.
have a podcasting network, and I just rolled out what's called Words from Warriors, and it's helping guys publish books. And we bring in do webinars with subject matter experts and help. They give them advice on the publishing methods, writing styles, and all sorts of different stuff. We do the same thing for each of the programs.
Sure.
And that was another reason why I decided to go down to write the fiction book. I had, like I said, I had wrote that part for my family, and then they told me I should publish it. So then I went back. Now I'm adding a bunch of details because, my family didn't need to know what Germany was like. They were there.
Yeah.
But now I have to add all these details to it
to make it.
And I was like, man, I am struggling so hard. So I wanted to go through this process as I was doing it, because I knew this program would be coming. It was the final part of our nonprofit. But I wanted to see the process for myself and go through it so I could give good advice and kind of help people steer away from mistakes that I made and so forth. And it is tough, man. But that's something I found out since I've been doing this, is the writing community is very helpful. Same with the podcasting community, that everybody wants to give back and help for the most part. And I think that's important.
It is. It really is. It's, since David was so generous with me, it's the same way I feel like, how can I help people, lessons learned and things like that. And what's interesting is I'm essentially self-published. In the publishing world, you've got your traditional big book deals for your John Grishams and things like that, and advanced royalties and things like that. That's not me. That's not us. And then you've got your middle ground with what they call hybrid publishing now, which is, where you've got sort of these full service publishers that offer you a suite of services like editing and design of your book and taking it all the way to print and getting it distributed. But you burden most of the costs. They don't pay up front. They're not giving you a big royalty. You're taking the burden on for most of that.
Yep.
And then you have the sort of the third model, which is your tradition, or your old school self-publishing, do-it-yourself model. And that's effectively what I did. My book carries the name of a publisher on the back. It's a local publisher to me here in Ohio. Wonderful publishing group. I loved their services for design work, but based on how they normally publish this book is, I apologize, I'm going a little off the rails in detail, but my book, I chose to publish it in using traditional offset printing. And so offset printing is your high quality print press, very traditional. It's what you want for the best visually appealing print quality. A lot of publishers, especially smaller regional publishers and so forth, they're going to use services that are more digital or more what they call print on demand, which
Mhm.
is, I'm butchering this, I know, but it's more of a Xerox machine, right? On steroids, probably. I'm oversimplifying it and grossly misrepresenting it, but effectively, the quality still isn't quite there for a book like mine that I wanted to pop with the photos.
Right.
So long story short, I did use her for design, but effectively, and it's nice to have a publisher's name on my book, but effectively it's self-published, and
Yeah.
I did all the heavy lifting. I run my own Amazon account for selling the books on Amazon. I ship every day from my basement out USPS. If you buy my book on my website, so it's a lot of hustle. It's a lot of hustle.
Absolutely. It's like you said, it definitely isn't easy. And at that aspect, now you're putting on different hats because now you have to be the self-promoter, you have to be the marketer, you have to do it all. And that gets you into the podcasting world because it's the same.
It does, but this is the fun part of the journey because, I just think about a year ago, right? I was sitting there, trying to figure. There's times where I rewrite a sentence 5 times, and I'm just, you start to question your own ability to spell a word. You're like, is that how it's spelled? And you're Googling grammar. I learned more in the last year about grammar than I probably did when I was a kid in school. But now's the fun part. This is the
absolutely, man.
The end of the road. I'm done writing.
Yeah. Well, I congratulate you on your book. It is an amazing book. And I will definitely make sure that I have all the links directly to your website and to an Amazon spot for people can buy it.
And I'll just tell you, my website is the preferred choice because I will autograph the copies sold through my website. So if you go out to Warehouse H or Blanton'sBook.com, those are my sites, and you'll get me an autographed copy.
All right. Well, yeah. Well, we'll put those links out there then.
Thank you.
And we'll get some because, like I said, dude, I love the book. I really did.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
When I got it and I started reading, I showed it to my mom. I said, look at this. This is nice.
Yeah.
And she was like, yep, it's a book.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Damn. That was kind of like a reaction I got from a lot of my friends and stuff too. I was like, okay.
Yep. Yeah. Well, one other question I got.
Yeah, sure.
And I have to know, has anybody from Blanton's ever reached out to you and said, hey, I want to see your collection?
So, great question. So I have a very good relationship with the distillery. I think I mentioned earlier, the brand owners, Blanton's brand owners, Age International, they're a little bit behind the scenes. They don't get involved with too much of anything other than Buffalo Trace, make more of it, and we'll tell you how much to make. But Buffalo Trace, and I have a fantastic relationship. And so, depending on when people are listening to this podcast, but I'm going down there here next week, late February, and going to be doing an event, book signing, and participating in an event that they're having for a limited group of people. I think it was tickets were sold to the public, but it's like 200 people. So I'm active with them. I've got my book in their gift shop. It's a big, Buffalo Trace is a big corporation like any other corporation. So just because I'm in their gift shop and I know a few folks down there doesn't mean like I have unfettered access to Buffalo Trace. All my friends are like, can you hook us up? No, I can't. I'm just happy they're selling my book. I don't want to push things too far. Like maybe I can give you, might be able to get you a tour. Okay. But that's, I don't get to like know what bourbons they're going to release next month or something.
Yeah. They're not spinning the wheel on the safe.
No. I'm on there on the shelf right next to candles, in the book the gift shop. So, but yeah, so I have a great relationship with them. They're awesome people. Their archives team, I worked with during the book, but even more interestingly, their records aren't always that great. And so I work closely with them when they can't answer questions from people, maybe like yourself. If you emailed them in with a picture of a rare bottle that they hadn't seen before, they might not have records of it. They'll contact me and say, hey, Dom, what is this? So it's a really cool relationship we have.
That is cool, man. Yeah. I reached out to them. My email probably went to their spam or something, but they haven't contacted me back. So that I don't have them on the schedule yet to get them on the show, but I did reach out to Margaret's Bake and I reached out to Buffalo Trace.
Nice. That's good. Well,
but maybe after I change the name, because 2 drunk dudes in a gun room.
Yeah, you never know. They might have turned them off a little, but we'll see. I can probably at least give you a few names you could try. I don't know if I could guarantee anything, but
it's all good, man. I laugh, because I've reached out just as a joke, because in the podcasting world, I'm nobody, So I reached out to people like Joe Rogan and stuff like that, and I was telling them, I think my email just went to their spam. I'm gonna try another email address and contact them.
Yeah.
But,
Hey, listen, you got to shoot your shot though, because
absolutely.
that is exactly what, and you think about, we talked about earlier, I with writing the book, I reached out to these authors, and there were some big names on that list. I won't mention them here. But I didn't get responses, and it took me just keep trying, and finally I got somebody who gave me the time of day, and it really paid off for me. And so, you got to shoot your shot.
Yeah. I mean, that the sponsor I have, Operation Encore, that was the same situation.
Yeah.
When I decided to start the radio station, I really didn't know anything about it. I just seen a problem and I wanted to fix it. And, I didn't know about all the legality part. So when I reached out to Operation Encore, at first he was like, well, let me give you some information. You kind of digest it for a couple weeks and then we can talk again. And I used a connection to even get to the guy. And it turned out the guy's name is Guy. So that worked out good.
It's a guy.
But man, we've had a great relationship ever since then, you know. And it was a perfect match. They had spent 2 years trying to find somebody that would play veterans music on a radio, and nobody would even give them an hour. They said it could be 10 o'clock Sunday night. We don't care. Just can you play nothing but OE artists, that are veterans? Nope. And so when I wanted to do it, he was kind of like, this could be too good to be true.
Yeah, right. Well, and what you're doing for the community, I mean, for the veterans, that's amazing. And think about those guys that are getting their music on the air, and that's really special. That's really
I love it, man. And that's another reason why I'm going to retire is because I want to do that full time.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome what you're doing, because I mentioned to you again prior to us recording here, but several of my grandparents were both World War II vets, so nothing but respect for military service. I got invited because of the book. I got invited to speak briefly. I don't think it's like a big UN speech, but to participate and briefly speak about Blanton's at a Folds of Honor event in Oklahoma City, or Tulsa, Oklahoma, later this year. So it's a big 300-400 people type event, and they're going to have a Blanton's tasting and things like that. And so Folds of Honor, of course, sponsoring military families and they're through scholarships and stuff. Yeah. So, it's like anything, like the second the military is peripherally involved with, ex-military folks and charities, call me. I'm a sucker. So
that's awesome, man.
We wouldn't be here if it weren't for you guys defending us. That's for sure.
Well, I appreciate it. And that's exactly what it takes, is all these guys. And this is the way I look at it. All these guys had dreams before they went in the military, and they put those on hold to serve. And now that they're much older, they're at a disadvantage to try to make these dreams come true. I mean, it's hard to get labeled at 40 years old. There's, they don't see the dollar signs there, and it makes it tough.
I used to work at a large corporation, and it was nice. One of the things, for all the different advocacy groups and things that companies have these days for their segments of populations, one of the ones I really resonated with was the veterans group, and they would have specific discussions around repatriation of the people into the corporate America and the lifestyle again, because it is very difficult when you have years of service. Even if you didn't suffer from a PTSD or something like that, you're accustomed to the sir, yes, sir, and your rigidity and to adopt and adapt rather to sort of the non-military lifestyle is tough. And we used to, I remember I had employees that worked for me that struggled with it, and they would even just their continual use of the military terms and the abbreviations and things. And I'm like, stand down. You don't need to, that's you gotta work on that, but all that is great when there's services like yours and what you're doing, and what some companies are doing, because that's needed, because the military it's so sad when you've got these folks that put their life on the line for our freedom, and then they come back and they don't have a future. They don't have somewhere to go. So it's anything we can do there is great.
Yeah. Well, like I tell everybody, man, the Army gives you everything you need to survive, to include emotions and your food, shelter, basic necessities, everything. What they don't give you is how to survive when you leave. And because when you reach into that toolbox and the only emotion you have to deal with everything is anger,
Yeah.
a lot of times it doesn't work out very well. And
Yeah.
that's where one of the problems is. But
Yeah.
I didn't mean to sidetrack with the old.
No, that's
but
that's good stuff though.
yeah, I want to bring you forward and let you have a chance to tell everybody about your website, where they can get your book. And I know I've had one of your links going down there at the bottom,
Yep.
but I want to
great.
give you that chance to tell everybody, because I do think it's a great book. And I really think a lot of military people are going to relate to this, because there's a big boom with military guys and bourbon. I mean,
Yeah.
you see them
Yeah,
all
for
over
sure.
Facebook. So I think this is a good book for them to get and learn some history about, and appreciate the craft.
Great. No, that's I really appreciate that. My primary website is warehouseh.com. That is sort of a catalog of Blanton's bourbon. It's got a bunch of pictures and information. Essentially, the book goes into much more detail than what the website says. But to buy the book itself, go to blantonsbook.com and you can get an autographed copy right there. It's a great gift. I see a lot of people that gift them. A lot of repeat customers come back and buy additional books because folks in their family that just want copies. And so $5 off multiple copies when you buy it. And yeah, it'd be great to get some of your listeners to reach out.
Absolutely, man. And I'm definitely a fan, so I will definitely be telling everybody, because we all have that little group that we drink with and talk with. And as soon as I
Yep.
seen it, I was already thinking the same thing. People in my mind are like, who would love this for Christmas?
And you don't have to be a reader. You know, so many people nowadays don't read, I think. And, you know, I've had so many people reach out to me and either say they picked it up and they couldn't put it down because they are, you know, it was a subject interesting to them. And one guy said the first book he read in 20 years or something. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But it's a great book just to leaf through. You don't have to, you know, it's chock full of beautiful pictures and things. So if you just want to kind of thumb through it, that's definitely doable. You don't have to be a reader.
Absolutely. Well, I'm gonna put you in the green room, man. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I've enjoyed this conversation. It's been
Yeah.
a lot of fun. I've learned some stuff too.
That was great. Well, thank you so much, Donald. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'll be with you in just 1 minute. All right, man. Everybody knows I always talk a little bit at the end. So this will be changing once we get our logo and everything finalized. I will be changing my backdrop. I'm just not into the old green screens. I like to keep things real. So y'all have to deal with that a little bit longer, but that'll be changing too. And as far as the show that we just had, I truly was looking forward to this. I learned a lot about Blanton's and how some of the liquor that I drink ties in with it, with Buffalo Trace. That was kind of one of the big questions I had. And I strongly recommend the book. Like I said, I do have a copy. It is autographed. As soon as I seen it, it was one of the best books I've received. So I want you guys to go out and check it out, especially if you're into bourbon, because you're going to learn a little bit about the history. You're going to learn a little bit about the craft, and you're going to learn a lot about Blanton's. So amazing gift. Check it out. I'll have all the links for everybody. So you won't have to remember any of this stuff. You'll just be able to click right there when it releases. And I strongly recommend you get it. So y'all take care. Remember, don't let the day kick your ass. Kick its ass. Y'all have a great night. We'll see y'all next week.